We're jumping back into the world of documentary producing this week as I sit down with Josh Pittman to discuss his journey from locations manager to producer as he's worked on documentaries filmed around the world. So let's dive in and get started. Thank you, Josh, for coming back onto the Producer Podcast.
No problem. Thanks for having me back on.
So last time we talked, you actually came on here to talk about locations and all that fun stuff that producers really should understand if they're going to do their job well. And so maybe to start, I'd love to hear your story of like, how did you go from that to now? I mean, you have, I want to say it's at least about half a dozen docs to your producer credit in different stages of completion.
Yeah, I don't know if it's that much yet or not. That's a great question. I think well, to say I haven't planned any of this would be very accurate and maybe an understatement, but it's just kind of one thing leads to another. And I think we talked location work is very similar to producing, and you're always dealing with producers. Um, you're kind of behind the scenes of behind the scenes. And so it's kind of a natural progression to just float over into producing territory. Um, and I wouldn't consider myself like a full-fledged producer, but especially on these smaller projects, I've really enjoyed having the chance to experiment and play around and learn stuff in the producing world. So there's a lot of crossover. It's a lot of the same stuff. I think when we were talking about locations, I kind of said, if you didn't have a location manager, a lot of those tasks would fall to the producer to accomplish. Um, and so you're already in that same headspace. You're already kind of trying to catch pieces that are falling between the cracks of different departments. Um, so yeah, it was just kind of like one thing led to another. Your friends need help, and you want to be along for the ride. So.
I guess then like what was it that it's like, okay, I will actually give this a try for you.
Well, yeah. So, growing up, my dad had this electrical contracting business. It was basically just him. We didn't really have employees or anything like that. And so I helped him for years doing electrical work. So I really developed kind of that small business, I guess, mindset of if you're not doing it, nobody is because you're the only person there. So if that job is going to get finished, then you have to do everything about the job. You have to see it through to completion. You have to care about everything involved in that project, all aspects of it, because if you don't, it's not like Bob, or Tim is going to show up and do it for you. It's like it's not going to get done. You're not going to get paid, and nothing happens. So I've always kind of had that mindset. And so then you get on to like a film set and you have like, 60 people on a film set walking around and you're like, it's a kind of a different feel because everybody has their one narrow focus or task or department that they're handling. And a lot of times if it doesn't fall under their department, um, they don't take care of it. So that kind of, when I started doing locations, I fell into it by accident, but it was a very natural fit because I could kind of just naturally begin thinking about, okay, what are the pieces not being picked up to make the project happen? So when I had the opportunity to work on the first documentary, it was really just kind of a natural thing of kind of what I had been doing on film sets, which was, hey, let's come in and see where we need to plug holes and see what pieces are being dropped and how I can just help, bring the project across the finish line. So it was, I was working with a good friend of mine, Enoch, and basically he's very creative and is very much concerned with the story and how all those pieces come together. When you only have a couple people on the team, it's like me or him or, a couple other people, you don't need multiple people in charge of the story. Uh, that's kind of a recipe for disaster. So, but you do need somebody in charge of all the other pieces besides
Mhm.
story and besides the creative piece. And so it was just kind of a very natural fit for me to come in and go, hey, you're handling that. Let me take care of some of these logistical pieces that I'm already thinking about, and it'll free you up to really focus and spend time that the story needs. Um, and so it's just kind of a natural progression of, if you're going to be in film and going to help projects and want to work with friends, then it was a very natural fit to be like, what problems need fixing? So
Yes, I can definitely relate.
yeah, exactly. It's not like, in a lot of the projects you've been on, it's not like you have some grand scheme of sign your line, Micah, you'll become a producer. It's more like, it's like, hey, we need Micah. Stuff is falling apart. Micah, can you just go take care of it?
Hmm.
It's your own project, and you're like, well, it's not going to get done unless I do it.
Kind of looking at your experience, because as everybody knows, producer is a very broad term. And I feel like it varies even more in the documentary sense because sometimes those projects are lasting even longer. You know, crew sizes are very different than what it is in narrative stuff. So, like on these docs that you were producing, like what all kind of fell under your umbrella of producer?
Uh, Good question. Well, yeah, at the end of the day, I feel like whether you're doing locations or producing or whatever, it's just kind of like it's like we have this project, and I'm constantly trying to think like, what are all the pieces that we're not thinking about that we need to be thinking about to make this project happen, so that we don't get halfway into it and we're like, oh, did no one think to bring food on the trip? Or oh, I guess no one purchased, reserved hotel rooms. Okay, guess we're all sleeping in the car. So I'm trying to think through all the things that might be necessary. Every project's different, but a lot of times you're starting from scratch and you have a wide open slate. Sometimes you have like, hey, we want to interview so and so, and so we know he's only available this date or this range of dates. So that helps hone in your project, and you're like, okay, well, it can only happen this week. And then you kind of start to build out the other pieces and go, okay, well, if we're going here, then this needs to happen here. And so I start to create a schedule. Uh, and it doesn't have to, like, the only person it has to make sense to really is me at the time
Hmm.
when I'm creating it. Because you're constantly going like, is this really the best schedule? Is there a better way to do this? There might be, but you got to start somewhere. So I try to put together a schedule. Um, if it's me and Enoch, we're usually working closely on schedule, logistics of travel and what that might look like, and dates and budget items and gear we might be renting and who's coming on the project and, hotel rooms or even story. I'm constantly trying to see how story is going to affect the schedule and how maybe there's elements we can cut out of the story, or just kind of be a sounding board to help, like Enoch, or really make the project as best as it can be, and that we're not um, focusing too much on one aspect where it'd be better to spread our resources out in another area instead.
One of the things that I found interesting is the first project you produced uh, was actually one being shot overseas. And like, I just have to hear, like, I guess, what were you thinking by that? I mean, I feel like there's a lot of people that'd be like, yeah, that's probably not the greatest move to like go to another country when you've never really done this position before.
Oh, I had never gone out of the country before, personally. So, yeah. So, you know, and it is so cool. Like, I don't take these projects for granted. So when I get to go, like this project was in Ireland. So to be able to go over there and basically uh, be in a situation where obviously you had to come through and do a good job, but also where you were able to make mistakes and learn. And it wasn't like you had a, multi-million dollar budget resting on your shoulders. So it was really cool to be able to have that opportunity to go over there and do that. Um, yeah, well, it was so again, this project was with Enoch, And we have a pretty good relationship and a pretty good working relationship. And so there were certain things we knew. We had this story, uh, and we knew it made sense to go over and film. So the story is about revival that happened in Northern Ireland. Um, Decades ago, I think it was like 100 years ago, early 1900s, and kind of just the effect that had over there. The host that we were interviewing had personal ties to some of the people over in Northern Ireland. It had helped him at a time in his life when he was really seeking God and trying to go deeper. So there was this whole story there, and so it made sense to go over there and interview those people and kind of walk through this journey that our host had already taken and kind of rediscover it for the viewers. So yeah, that was a great trip. It was a fun trip. I think we did some things well, uh, and I think I personally know I learned a lot. So we didn't do as bad as we could have done, but I think we learned how to do things better for next time. Uh, and you get yourself in all sorts of situations, whether it's, trying to get a carnet together and then I think we lost or Delta lost like five of our main pieces of equipment cases. And so there was like the first 2 or 3 days, we were only getting a couple hours sleep between the 2 or 3 days that we were there. So, and then of course you land, and just international travel is, and if you there's certain things that you just don't think about or don't realize are going to be an issue until you're actually there.
Mhm.
Um, and one of the things that I took away from that project was really trying to budget in time and give yourself more time to get over jet lag, to do certain things. Um, so yeah, I don't know if you have any specific questions on that, but that was a great learning experience.
So I guess, especially since you hadn't been out of the country before for anything, let alone a film project, like how did you go about like preparing and figuring out like what things you did need to do um before leaving for this trip?
Good question. Um, you don't know what you don't know. And so you always try to find out what it is that you might not know that is going to come back and bite you. Um, Thankfully, on this one, our host knew people over there, which opened the doors for us to be able to work with a local church and get a few drivers from there. And also, one of actually the pastor there was basically our key contact and probably could have been seen as a local fixer. He wasn't with us all the time, but he was able to open a few doors for us. He was able to help us with a few logistical items. And I would just say, anytime you're traveling overseas, always assume that you don't know things, even if you're researching. Always assume that you're going to need more time in your schedule than you think. Um, and always try to have local contacts of some sort. You don't necessarily need to hire a fixer for certain projects. It was like a 3-person crew, plus our host. So it wasn't like we were doing this huge project. Um, but if we didn't know anybody on the ground, if we didn't have any local contacts, it would have been very difficult. And there's certain things that your local people will know that will just create efficiency. And so it's if you have any local contacts, that can be huge.
So then, because I know that's one of the things some of the other filmmakers who have done like documentaries and that had talked about on the show with me is like finding a good production fixer. Um, so have you done any other docs overseas where you have hired or brought on more of like an official production fixer type guy, or has it just mainly been the like local contacts that can help with stuff, but they're not actually industry people?
I have done one other project overseas, and for that project, we did not hire a fixer either. These were all European countries that are, uh, relatively safe and modern and all the above. You don't know what you don't know. But there's some projects where you can take a more calculated risk and go, you know what, this is the scope of our project. If this changes, this is going to have to change drastically for us not to be able to get something usable. And so you kind of look at it and go, okay, is it worth it to bring on an actual fixer, or are these local contacts going to be enough that, all that we need and be able to be sufficient for our needs? For the second international project, again, we had local people that we knew. There was another local pastor who was actually an American pastor who was living over there pastoring a church where we were going. So that helped because he was an American and knew how Americans thought, but he was also a local who knew people and um, could kind of help us with a few questions we had. For that project, we were over there and we had received like 4 parking tickets in like the first week we were there. And this was like for like parking in a parking spot and getting a ticket and being like, why did we get a ticket? We thought we were doing everything correct. And we're like, and why did we get 4 of them? Like, here in the States, that would be like, really careless driving and it'd be a serious thing. Well, so we asked the pastor over there, we're like, hey, we just got like 4 tickets. Like, what's up? And he looks at us and goes, he starts laughing and he goes, I got a stack like, 4 inches tall of tickets that are unpaid on my desk right now. He's like, that's just kind of, how they do it here. And just knowing that little piece of information completely changed everything that we were thinking. Um, by the way, we did end up getting multiple more tickets. And I think uh, for reasons that I think were incorrect, because we were parking and using parking apps and doing all these sort of things, but uh, I don't know. Maybe we had tourist written on our forehead. I don't know. But it's those sort of things that you don't realize are going to be needful. And so having somebody locally being able to help you even navigate around town or do things like that, one thing that I have, and if you've traveled internationally, this is kind of obvious, but especially when you're planning, one thing that I've realized I need to budget more time for is just travel. On Google Maps, you can research to the nth degree before you go, but actually driving around a city internationally, it says on Google's that it might take 15 minutes and you might allocate 25 minutes for that trip. But until you're actually there and you're dealing with, pedestrians and bikers and realizing there's no parking when you get there and there's all these sort of things, you need to get gas, but gas stations aren't as available, or you need to stop at a store, but there are no stores available. Just all those sort of things make your trip longer and it takes more time. And it's harder. It's not as easy as it might look on Google Maps. So you always have to budget in more time. And stuff just takes longer. There's not a McDonald's on every corner. There's not a uh multiple food options everywhere that you're going to be shooting. And it's not like you can just call in Uber Eats all the time. So all these sort of things factor in and just take longer. The basic essential things just take longer. Is kind
Mhm.
of what I found.
So you're saying you weren't like doing the whole Tom Cruise Mission Impossible and finding all those like alleyways that your car can just like squeeze down to keep avoiding all the traffic jams.
Well, it is funny. Um, there were several alleys that we drove down, and for all the parking tickets we got, there's one place I remember that wasn't even a parking spot, and I was pretty sure we weren't supposed to be there. We never got a ticket. Uh, so it. I would say that probably looked like the Tom Cruise parking spot, and that would make sense. So,
One other thing I gotta ask because I remember seeing, I don't know if it was you or Enoch posting BTS about this, but like since it was a small crew, you all traveled over together on the same flights and that. What was that like trying to make sure multiple people and gear and all this made it to an international destination?
yeah. So, flights are great when they work, and when they don't, it gets tricky. So on the first project, we had a carnet, which basically You get it signed by the US before you leave the country. You get it signed by the country that you're going to, and then you get it signed when you leave that country you're going to, and then you get it signed by the US when you get back in. Um, the most important part of all that is that you get it signed by the US when you leave. And then if you skip the rest of the signatures, you still have a pretty good case. But because we were traveling with the carnet, which helped us avoid import and export taxes, because we were saying we have all this equipment that we're taking into a country and we're leaving with that same equipment. We didn't purchase or sell anything in that country. Because we had that, we had gear that was sprinkled about all our crew members. And so, but it was only one carnet. So basically, we had to show up and all be together and have all our luggage with all this gear together when we got it signed in America before we went over to the other country. That meant that we were literally coming from, we had three crew members coming from three different airports across the country. And so we had to all end up at the same airport in order for all this to work before we left. So, you know, we did that. We ended up in DC. Uh, we got it checked. That was also the place that Delta lost four or five of our most important cases of equipment. We were able to get that equipment. So we let's see, how did this happen? We ended up in DC. We eventually got all our equipment, but we had to delay our flight so that our equipment could catch up because they finally found all our bags. It was a very long ordeal. Makes for a great story, but very very long at the time. Didn't get much sleep that night. Um, so we get our so we were supposed to fly out the next day to New York at like 7 or 8 in the morning. Well, our bags were coming in at like 10. So we delayed, two of us delayed our flights to get our bags and then fly up to New York. There was only room for two people on that flight to New York. So one of us had to stay on the original flight and go to New York. So, anyways, all three of us eventually reached New York at the same time to get the carnet signed so that we can all fly over together and land in Dublin. So it's those sort of things that are like tricky, but you just do the best you can. The second trip we went on, we actually considered everything. We were traveling much lighter and intentionally. And we felt it was safe to not have a carnet. Most of the stuff could fit in either our backpack or an extra suitcase, so we did not carry a carnet, which meant that we did not all have to fly in together. Um, some of us did fly in together though, and we tried to give ourselves more time. Usually these international flights, sometimes they'll start at like you fly out at like 6 or 7 at night, and then you get over there at like 10 a.m. European time.
Mm.
That's approximate. But when you do that, you don't get a good night's sleep on the plane, and then your entire day from like starting at 10 a.m. when you get there is mainly just catch up and trying to get to a hotel, trying to get the essentials you need, food, water. Um, and so what I've learned is to add an extra day. When have that day as just getting in and getting to your hotel. Have the next day as your, okay, guys, let's assess where we're at. Let's get our gear together and then start filming the third day. Um, so yeah, that's little little tip I've learned. Budget
Good.
more time.
Good to know. Oh, so then like looking at that first project, what was like probably one of your biggest producing challenges?
We were interviewing about 6 or 7 different people. And so we had it was my goal was to organize all of them so that we had their availability and make the schedule because they were all in different towns and they were, sometimes over an hour driving distance apart. Some of our locations that we wanted to film at were, considerable distance apart from each other. So trying to schedule all that and then um, most of it stayed according to schedule, but there were a few things we had to pivot on. Um, when you plan and plan and plan as much as you can, and you and your team are on the same page, when you have things that come up, you're able to react quicker and make better decisions because you're all on the same page and you know what's important ahead of time. And you it doesn't necessarily matter who comes up with the idea for the solution. You all know what you're trying to do, and you're all trying to do the same thing and for the same goal. Um, I wouldn't say there was like major issues on that, besides the fact that we all kind of got sick. I lost my voice about halfway through. And since I was the guy talking with all the contacts and kind of being the liaison, that was kind of difficult because, you have these foreign strangers show up asking if they can film you or your church or your location, and the guy can't talk and sounds like, he's sick or something. And so, it looked a little bad, but um, that went pretty, it was a pretty good smooth trip for all things considered. One of the biggest things we had on that was we had done Zoom calls ahead of time with some of the people we were interviewing, and we had really tried to hone in the story as best we could, knowing these who the people were, and having communicated with them ahead of time and made sure we were all on the same page. When we got over there and met some of these people in person, we, especially some of the people who were supposed to be kind of the pivotal characters of this story, we realized that they did not have the on-camera uh, charisma that was kind of needed to have these long, in-depth interviews. Well, because those were kind of the key points of the entire story, that forced us to kind of rethink the entire documentary. So we're realizing this halfway through our, whatever it was, 10 days in the country, or less. And you only have so many options at that point to finish a story. And you have to make sure that you get all the pieces because you can't come back. And so that was interesting to navigate. Enoch did a great job doing that. And at those sort of times, you really have to do the best you can and then leave the rest to God, because um, there are things that are going to be outside of your control, and you have to that's why it's important to go into these things, very prayerfully, and trying to uh, really be in the right place, and doing what you feel God wants you to do, because at those sort of times, then you realize, you know what, I'm not here of myself, and God's here with this, and with me on this, and He knows this problem before I even came over here. And so you ask for wisdom, and He makes it happen, And on that project in particular, I think the story turned out great, but really, I think it was impactful just us going over there, and rehearing and retelling these stories of revival. And at the end of the day, you do the best you can, and then you leave the results up to God. And so, that story, I don't think has gone like far and wide and changed a whole bunch of people's lives. But I think just the act of us going over there, praying for revival, going over there, trying to do this, what we felt God was calling us to do, for the right reasons and all this sort of stuff. And then you just have to leave the results in God's hands and go from there.
Jumping back, and you kind of talked about this at the start of the call here about how like locations into producing is a very easy, or like makes sense, kind of transition. But like on any of these projects, has there been something that's popped up where it's like the director or whoever was like, this came up, I don't know how we're gonna solve it, and you're just like, there's something from your location experience where it's just like instantly you're just like, we'll just do this, problem solved.
So it all overlaps and it all ties in. So much of what I do when you're trying to schedule and produce is I'm also doing the locations, and I'm also doing, you know, figuring out where to park people, and figuring out if we have permission to actually be filming in a street or on a sidewalk or any of this sort of thing. So having the locations experience and being able to work with, the civil authorities, gives you a pretty good, it gives you a much better starting point to be able to make informed decisions, and to know kind of what's going to matter to those people and what's not going to matter. Um, there's been several locations that we've had to find, and having that background of going, okay, where do I look? What am I looking for? Um, and trying to figure out what will work for the production. is always helpful. So there's a lot of overlap. I'm trying to think of a good story, and I can't really think of a good story, but I can think of some things that in my location and producing work that have been really close calls, and how God has come through when when it didn't look like it. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Are
uh,
those where the gray hairs came from?
yeah. Well, okay, so uh, I was so this is location world. I was on a film set in we had like the keys to the city. I had this one contact who was excellent. Our schedule had gotten changed. And I'm trying to remember, I don't think I knew about it until like later the day before. Anyways, next morning, I'm out at like 4:30 in the morning, setting up in the city. We had the road blocked off, and I'm looking over, and it occurs to me that our first scene is in front of this building, and the grip department needed access inside that building to set up lights. Well, our first scene is like at 6, our call time. Well, obviously the city is not open, and there no city contact is awake, and I need access to that building, and I'm here at like 4:30 in the morning, going like, huh, well, that's interesting. Um, and so I'm like, okay, well, there's nothing I can do. Um, so, except like pray about it and do the best I can, and not tell anybody that might get stressed about it before I find a solution. So I'm like, just letting everybody set up. And at some point, I know they're going to come up and ask me about this. So I'm just like buying my time. And eventually I'm like, okay, like it's still dark out. I'm going to walk around to the back of this building and just see if there's anything open or anything. And this is like 5:30 in the morning. So I walk around to the back of the building. This is a city building, mind you. The door is cracked open. It's not closed all the way at the back. I'm like, what sort of city security would leave the door open in the back? And I'm like, so if I open this door, am I going to get like shot, or the police going to show up? And I'm like, well, there's only one way to find out. So I open the door and I get inside, no alarms. And so I walk over to the front door and I push the front door open, no alarms. And we had permission to be at the building. We just didn't have anybody there to open it up because they didn't know we were going to show up that early because our schedule had gotten changed. So I open up the front door like nothing happened, gaff tape it open and just kind of go on my way. And I'm like, those are the sort of stories that God shows up. One of the times we were in DC and we were filming on another project, and I was again like the producer on this one. And we had gotten the Library of Congress. We had reached out to them a few weeks before, and they had said, sure, you can come film here. Uh, they gave us a date. They said, actually, this day we're closed. And so if you wanted to come here, that'd be great. I was like, sure. Uh, there were a lot of details that hadn't been ironed out. But at that point, I was just glad that we had some sort of communication between them. And I was trying to not lose that. Um, Long story short, the Friday before the Monday that we're showing up, they're obviously closed on the weekends. So we're filming Monday, and they had said could be there at like 10 o'clock. Friday, I don't have an answer. And so I'm like reaching out to them, and like, I'm still not hearing anything back. And all I had was, yes, your filming for Monday is approved. And it was like I hadn't signed anything, I didn't have anything. So Monday morning rolls around, and I tell everybody, I'm like, hey guys, look, like we have done everything we can to try to get this location. We don't have it fully locked, but like I'm just going to show up and like trust God to make it happen. And I don't really like today could be a just a complete flop, because if this doesn't work, this is one of our key scenes that we need. And like every day you're spending money and you have a crew there, and you're like, well, this has to work. We have to film today. So so I'm like trusting God. We go over and we park. It's like 9:30. We try to get there pretty early. We're walking down the sidewalk at 9:45, and I get an email, and they say, hey, you've been all approved. Come park in the front. Here's what you need to know, and here's how to get in. And I was like, hey guys. So we're literally like a block away walking down the sidewalk, getting permission, final permission to get inside. Uh, those are the sort of things that I have a few of those stories, and it's so cool to see God work, um, and make those happen, because at a certain point you've done all you can do, and you can keep spinning your wheels and banging your head against the wall. And I've kind of learned to recognize when that happens and kind of back off and just be like, you know what? God has brought me this far and just going to pray. And, he brings it to pass. And yeah, those are really cool stories,
Mhm. Definitely.
especially in the moment. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
yeah, we're safe.
Yeah. So I gotta ask, did you find the president's book while you were there?
So we actually got to go inside and walk around, and we got to go up into the uh, kind of the walk around the upper balcony area where all that was filmed. So it was, yeah, it was pretty cool. Half of that was, and that movie was not filmed there, obviously,
Hmm.
because you go in the back to get to the little elevator that takes you up to the top, and you're like, this is the backside of a library that looks like it's in a basement covered in cement. Uh, Very non-photogenic. But
Oh yeah. Since you brought up uh like that project, that you were doing in DC and that, like I'm curious to hear like what has maybe stood out for you between the projects you've produced overseas versus like projects you've produced in the US in terms of either like just things that are like, oh, this is completely different how you handle this type of thing, or maybe it's a type of challenge where it's like, consistently this is an issue in the US, but overseas, like it's not really a thing at all.
I mean, from my limited experience over filming overseas, I would say that here in the States, it's easier to get a lot of things are easier. It's easier to get bigger vehicles, rent bigger vehicles that work better for your production. It's easier to get around. You're not driving on the wrong side of the road. You're not trying to figure out street signs in a different language. Um, you can make right turns at red lights and it's not illegal. All those sort of things are easier. Insurance is usually cheaper. And what I mean by that is if you have if some a location is requesting insurance over in the States, 1 million is common. Over in Europe, I've been asked if I could deliver 10 million on a location. And so it changes and it's more expensive and all that affects it. Um, Over in the States, things are faster and easier to access. And locations, you know how things work over here, and so the unwritten rules of culture, and so it's easier to communicate and it's easier uh, to do things. There's a lot of it's easier to get insurance for location. There's a lot of websites that'll give you insurance for a day for a location over here, whereas overseas you have to go through an agent usually, and it's a whole different thing. They need to know what country you're going to, all that sort of thing. Um, Over here, it's much easier to get Airbnbs or locations to film at or any of that sort of thing. Um, so yeah, there's that's kind of the biggest things, and it's the basic things because producing is at its essence very easy things. How do we get our crew from point A to point B? How do we feed our crew? Where does our crew sleep? uh you know who do we need to talk to allow us to film at this place? um how do we pay the person for filming here, and what currency is that, and what is how do I get them this money? You're usually transferring money via bank transfers or things like that overseas. Over here I can literally walk up and hand them cash or a check or something like that. So those are the nothing of producing is like majorly difficult. It's just usually you don't have either time or resources or solutions. And so you're put in this kind of pressure cooker, and being in a culture and in a place where you have more options available and what those options are, like here in the States, makes it way easier to accomplish those things. The trade-off is overseas, you're in some pretty cool places, and they make buildings that are way older than ours, and you get to see some pretty cool stuff.
Kind of on that same note, I just this is more just like a fun question. What was easier, producing overseas or producing in DC?
uh, Good question. I mean, probably DC.
Interesting.
Only because again, at a certain point you feel like you have more options available to you. Uh and you have, in DC, I was able to rent one large extended SUV and it was able to fit the entire crew. Over in Europe, we had to rent multiple vehicles, which were super expensive. And just to be able to get our crews from point A to point B and do all the things we need to do logistically. Um, and even like on this last project overseas, finding water. So we had our crew was about 6 people, um, but all together on the kind of the team that we were working with and interviewing, there was, anywhere from like 10 to 15 people at times. So they weren't all necessarily like under our care, but they sometimes were. So for instance, if we're traveling and needed water, um, I was trying to supply people with bottled water, especially for the long drives, especially if there were not places that we were stopping and getting it. Overseas, that's harder to get. Here you walk into a Walmart, you buy a few cases of water, and you're good to go for a week. Over there, I was having to buy these packs of, 6 packs of water. And at the time, I was literally getting a Lime scooter to go to Aldi to pick up the water, and you can only carry so much that way. So it's just the very simple things sometimes become more complicated. Um, and that's the other reason why you have to budget in more time to make things happen, because just getting water for people, that's taking you an hour and going out of your way uh, just to get water to last you a couple days. So it's those sort of things that you don't necessarily think about, but that that really make you less efficient when you're over there. I will say though, I love Gatorade, and obviously the TSA doesn't like it if I bring on tons of Gatorade bottles. So I discovered Gatorade powdered packets, and you can buy them off Amazon and fit them into your backpack. And those are awesome, especially if you're worried about your crew getting dehydrated. So,
I mean, you just have to bring them in 3 ounces or less, right?
right. Right. Which looks strange in my suitcase, but whatever.
Oh yeah.
Here's another good last minute story. This was not in DC. This was in another place. I, about a week out from filming, I realized I needed to have a couch and a rug in place for this interview for this location. Uh, Obviously, it's a different city. And so I'm like, well, do I rent a couch? Do I buy a couch? Couches are expensive. Can I return the couch? How does this work? Long story short, I was like, Home Depot has a couch. They have the couch we need. I'll ship it to the store. It said it would arrive there on in time. We were driving in Sunday. I needed it for Monday morning. So I get to Home Depot at like 5 in the afternoon on Sunday. And they said, "Oh, sorry, that couch did not come in." And I was like, "Oh, that's a bummer. I need that couch." And this is Sunday. And it's like 5. And I'm like, "Well, where do I find a couch in this city for tomorrow morning that matches the look we want?" So I go over to like a Goodwill. I go to another place, like completely, just bombing it. And then we find this store that closes at 6. So I'm like running out of time. And it is like the couch wholesale like castle. And it is like filled with all these couches that are like on sale that are just what we're looking for. And I'm like, this is perfect. So, anyways, I think I bought the couch at like 5:59, like a minute before they closed. And we had it in place for the next morning. Uh yeah, just neat last minute stories of again how God works it all out.
Did you flip the couch then and sell it on Marketplace, or did you like return it a day later?
Well, when we were leaving the city, it was packed up in our SUV, which just barely fit, but it was packed and I didn't know what I was going to do with it. And then our host it ended up being a perfect fit for their house. And I was like, you know what? This is going to help me. It's going to help the host and it's going to help everybody. So we just, that turned out to be an easy solution there. So
Nice. So then kind of starting to wrap things up here. I'd love to hear now that you've produced several docs, is there anything you've learned that is now going to like influence or make you a better locations manager the next time you go to do that position again?
Oh, good question. As a location manager, I'm always looking for problems ahead of time, and I'm always kind of watching the crew on set to see what issues might be going to happen or what problems I might be able to head off before they become problems that affect the whole crew. Um, and I'm generally trying to do that before it becomes an issue for the producer too, because if I can take care of stuff at a very low level before they become big forest fires, uh, that helps producers because on those sort of sets, if producers start getting involved, sometimes it becomes an even bigger deal at that point because it's getting more attention and it's affecting more people and it's causing more disruption to our schedule. Um, a lot of this stuff is just that, looking for problems before they start affecting producers. As a producer, one thing I have found is and I learned this as a location guy, but it also applies to producing. As a producer, you might be responsible for seeing the project across the finish line, and you might be kind of in a leadership role on that movie. That does not mean that you need to have all the answers. And it does not mean that you need to be the person who comes up with all the solutions. Even though they're your problems, you don't need to be the person to come up with all the solutions. Your job is just to ensure that somebody somewhere has a solution that helps the whole project be completed. Um, as a location manager, I remember this one project. I was looking all over town. I was talking to people, knocking on doors, cold calling, trying to get a hospital location. This was during COVID, and I was not having very good options. It was very last minute. Somebody else on our crew, I think it was one of our associate producers, found this location that we ended up using as a hospital. Now, there was a lot of pressure. People were looking at me to come up with that location. I didn't find the location, but I was like, you know what? I'm just happy we found it. I did the best I could do, and God provided a solution. It just wasn't through me. As a producer, that can sometimes be even harder because uh, there was another project I was on, and I was helping work on the logistics, and I was helping drive. And when it actually came to the day, it was just like a short 3 day kind of mini shoot. Um, it ended up that I wasn't really doing that much. And I found myself just driving the crew around. And even my great idea I had for the only way this would work logistically, uh, somebody else on the crew was like, well, what if we just did it this way? And I was like, I never even thought of that. That makes so much more sense. And it worked out that we also didn't have to do everything that I thought we had to do. Uh, and again, that was a solution that I didn't come up with. Here I am, the producer, and I'm basically just a glorified driver. But at that point, it's important for me to remember, my goal is to be there to ensure that the project crosses the finish line. And if that means that I'm driving my crew around, or if that means that I'm creating a space where other people can have ideas and have creativity and present those and feels welcome and valued to do that, then at the end of the day, I guess I'm doing my job. It doesn't mean
Mhm.
that I have to know everything or come up with all the answers. So it's just being a good leader and letting your team do what you hired them to do and do it in the best way, enabling them to do it the best way they can. So,
Hmm. No, definitely. I do just have to add something of my own experience there because it's great when people do that, but if they have a solution, like they need to also make sure they inform the higher ups of it. Because I've been on sets where it's like, we were trying to find a second generator to help us or something, and somebody found one and they didn't tell us. And then we all show up on set and we have it, but it's like to have that, you have to rearrange your whole parking plan or, the different factors like that. And it's like, we could have saved 30 minutes of moving cars around if we had been told this, a day ago.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And that's a big thing. It's just communication. And like, what does that mean? It means trying to be on the same page with everybody else on your crew as much as possible. And if you have information like you just explained, like somebody on your crew did, then sharing that with the people who need to know it. Um, because again, film is not rocket science, but sometimes it can be a game of minutes and efficiency. And at that time, that's when communication is really beneficial because you can cut out all this time that you and money and actually save time and money.
Hmm. Definitely. So then, I'd love to hear now that you have like documentary experience, like what would be your biggest piece of advice you would give to somebody who's about to produce their first doc?
I would say have fun with it and enjoy the ride and know that you don't know everything and use that as a way to get better and also use that as a way to act as kind of a safeguard. Go into the project knowing there's stuff you don't know and always kind of being ready to get that information and then pivot based on that. Um, and then the other part is just, have fun with it, enjoy it, uh, and learn everything you can. Try to be the best leader, the best producer you can be, and just bring value because you never know where it will lead, and what'll happen, and you never know how the project might be used. And I think it's important for me to try to set an atmosphere of uh, you know, calm and peace and reliance on kind of framing everything in prayer and with the right mindsets and priorities for my team because it helps them and I think it helps us all be more cohesive and more efficient. Um, and I think personally, just knowing having that relationship and that trust with God is huge because that's going to be your anchor when stuff goes wrong. And it's also going to be your solution when stuff goes wrong. So,
Definitely. And so then rounding out this episode here, wanted to touch on something definitely applies to the producer life, whether you're doing docs or features or whatever, but can also apply to any other position. But just like in your experience, what have you learned about leading a healthy lifestyle while on set?
thought these were going to be easy questions. um, wow, I am still trying to figure that out. You know, I am still trying to figure that out. There is, a lot of these sets, again, none of this is hard, but you find your sets and places where you don't have the resources you need to make something happen as efficiently as you would like, which means that somebody is having to go above and beyond. You don't have the time you need to make something happen, which means somebody is going above and beyond, or you don't have the money to make something happen, which means that somebody is going above and beyond. So it's kind of you're going to probably have a lot of those sort of situations in this film world. The what I'm trying to learn now is drawing healthy boundaries and going, okay, this is the time to press hard and crunch time, and then this is the time to not be on call 24/7, and then also trying to look ahead and be like, how does this look? A few years down the road, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. What is a healthy way to do this? And I haven't figured that out yet. I think there are better ways of making feature films than others. I think 10-hour days are way more healthier than 18-hour days. And I think, uh, the way that I treat my crew, the way that anybody treats their crew, I think and we've heard this before, but I think it's just as important as the end product. Because, we want to do this to make a difference and reach the world and change the world. But I don't think God's calling us to do that at the expense of our crew. And so obviously there's going to be hard times, but I think that when I try to be on a project, I try to consider those little things. I try to make days as easy as possible on our crew, try to budget in extra time, knowing that things are probably not going to go according to plan. And they might end up being 12 days or more. But if I'm shooting for an 8 hour or a 10-hour day, then at least I'm not shooting for a 12-hour day and we're going into 14 and 16 hours.
Mhm.
So trying to do as much as I can to take care of my crew because, you know, if we're in this for the long haul, then I think it's the small steps we take that really make a big difference, you know.
Yes, that is for
If you
sure.
find any good answers though, please let me know.
I'm trying, but nothing yet. Or at least nothing I'm ready to share.
Right.
Theories untested.
Yeah, yeah. I hear you.
Ready. Well, with that, we'll let you get back to traveling the world, producing documentaries, or finding doors just that happen to be open, or all those good things.
Right.
But thanks again for taking the time to come back onto the show.
Man, thank you. This is a journey for me, and I'm learning so much. And the more I learn, the more I realize what I don't know. But anything that I may have learned that might help other people who are in the same boat, I'm more than happy to talk about it. And at least somebody might realize they're not alone. So,
And with that, we're going to close the books on this episode of the Producer Podcast. Join us next Friday for an all new episode of the show as season 11 continues. Until then, make sure to follow us on social media, pick up your copy of The Producer's Life, and thanks for listening.